To prep the bottom of the shell, these shells sometimes don't come completely flat. Sometimes they're a little wonky if you put them on a nice flat surface. Easiest way to do it is just get it on a nice flat surface. Take maybe a magnetic scribe like this. You can put things underneath it depending upon how high you want to cut. But generally you can just take this and drag it along the bottom of the tank all the way around to create a nice even surface that you can grind to. And then you'll have a perfectly flat bottom that you can at least start from flat when we try to fit the tunnel and tank bottom. Ground down that bottom line. Now it's nice and stable. We don't really have any rocking back and forth to speak of. So we have that nice flat surface to work from. Alright, we're going to start talking about fitting the tunnel to the shell. Or we're going to cut the notches for the tunnel in the front and the rear. You can draw directly on this with a Sharpie and just kind of start cutting and test fit and do that until it fits right. That is a perfectly legitimate way of doing it. It actually works very well. What I like to do first is take a little bit of die chem before I do any scribing. Straight the front and rear of the tank, so I can draw on it with a scribe. Alright, to determine the height that we're going to scribe onto the tank, we'll take one of the bottoms, and I just have like a height gauge right here, just a height scribe. You can do it with building up blocks of wood and then having a sharp nail on it, and doing something like that is another good method if you don't have this tool. But we'll just get it so that it's going to scribe right at the top right there. And then we'll transfer that over to the tank with the appropriate amount of shim stock that is the 16 gauge thickness, so that the tank is sitting at the right height. Alright, we have the material underneath it that is actually going to act as the thickness of what the bottom would be, so that the tank is sitting up where we need to scribe the line. Got the die chem on there that is dry enough to scribe. We're going to take it and drag this across and create a nice guideline right there, which is going to be the height to with which we're going to cut the tunnel notch. Easiest way to determine the center points for the tunnel in the front and rear is going to be taking your tank shell, put it on a piece of paper, get a Sharpie, draw the line around the outside of the tank to make a pattern shape, cut it out with a set of scissors, fold it in half. The fold in the front and the rear will mark where the center of the tunnel should be, and then we can transfer that mark right over to the tank with a scribe or a Sharpie. Folded the pattern in half, got a good fold, got the areas on the front and rear that we marked the center area. So what we'll do is we'll take the shell, we'll actually tape this down to the flat surface and take the shell, put it on top of this, and then transfer the marks. Got it taped down, take the shell, make sure the bottom edge is pretty clean. Place it down on the pattern. Make sure it's centered nice. And then transfer the center mark on the front and on the rear. By the way, it's a good idea to keep the guard on your angle grinder. I'm doing this so that we can see easier with the videotaping, but it's more hazardous to work with this grinder with the guard off. Be careful. Got the marks transferred, got the center mark, so now we can transfer what the width of the tunnel will be, and then draw our contours and start cutting with the cutting disc. We have the tunnel contours drawn on the front and rear of the tank. What we do is we'll take an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel on it, make vertical cuts next to each other, and then use the edge of the wheel to nip it off, and use a half-round file to make it nice and smooth, or a die grinder, and then do that both on the front and rear of the tank. Then we'll test fit the tunnel bottom. Here's an example of the vertical cuts before we nip them out on the front of the tunnel and the rear. I got the notches roughed out in the front and rear of the tank. You can see how we're starting to get close to this fitting. Almost fits right down on there. Just need to work a little bit on some of the contours, and then we'll get a really nice fit. I have the shell, I have the front and rear tunnel sections refined a little bit more. We got something that's going to fit nice right down on there. Not too much of a gap, more of a gap if we were just going to flush weld this. But what we're going to do is once we cut this bottom tunnel out, we're actually going to hammer this 16 gauge piece of the tunnel up to meet the slight gap that we have, so we have a nice seam area. You can see how the tank sits nice and flat, so we're going to have a good welding area right along the bottom of the tank. I get the tank centered on the tunnel and bottom right now. What I'll do is I'll take my scribe. I'm going to get in here and hold it down, keep it where it is, and scribe a line along the bottom of the tank to mark the cutout that we need for the bottom, how much of the metal we need to trim off. Get it nice and close, get a good deep scribe. I'm going to leave these areas, but I will put a light line here just to know where the tank ends on the front and the rear. That up. I don't know if you can see that, but we do have a nice scribed line there in the shape of the tank. Tunnel and bottom cutout. So we got the shell, fits right on there. Alright, we have the sections of the tunnel that stick out past the shell here. I'm going to show you a way that I like to fold this tunnel up over to the tanks. We have a nice folded seam here that we get to weld, which is going to be really nice and strong. Basically what I do is I've got just this piece of solid brass that I like to use as kind of a soft drift to be able to beat on this and not really mar the metal too much. You can use a piece of pipe or a piece of steel, solid steel like this. It's really not going to make that big of a difference. But this is what I like to use. You can see how we're starting to flare that out and towards the tank shell so that we can get it to sit nice and flat. You just go slow. The metal moves pretty easily. You just don't want to force it and go too quickly. Once I get to this point, I'll finish it off by using just a body hammer with a nice flat face. Just hammer right down to get it nice and close to the tank prior to welding.